Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining me on the podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Today, a little bit more of an introspective and maybe a somber type of episode. So, if you've been paying attention to the news over the past couple weeks, you've been seeing all of the stories coming out of California about the fires that have been going on. And just to give you a little bit of a recap of the numbers as of today, so I'm recording this Monday afternoon, January 13th, 2025. So far, 24 people have been pronounced dead, 12,000 buildings have been destroyed, 190,000 people have been evacuated, and about 38.6 thousand acres of land have been burned in the Palisades, Malibu, Manhattan Beach area of LA. So it's a lot of damage. There's a lot of stories coming out and a lot of just decay and sadness all around. And, I think this one has gotten a lot of publicity because of where it's happened. You can definitely say that. A lot of rich and famous people live in this area, and a lot of rich people with a lot of influence live in the area, right? So I've seen people who are in the southeast that have dealt with like ice storms and stuff as of late saying, yeah, they're getting coverage, but where's our coverage, right? And it's just a reality of the way the weather is with climate change and all that, how it just changes the dynamics that we may have been used to. The Palisades were kind of built on like this canyon area, and you could argue that maybe no development should have been happening there, but it has, and people have lived there, and a lot of people have gone like, well, why should I shed a tear over a rich person's house being destroyed? And the thing is, it's not just a rich person, right? It's a lot of people, like I said, 190,000 people. Not all of them are millionaires and billionaires. So there's a lot of stories of people who were in houses that they bought back in the 50s and 60s, and they're locked into old property tax amounts that have enabled them to stay in the LA area. So those people now, as the city looks to rebuild, has dealt with are going to be dealing with trying to find a new home for a budget that they can afford. So, it reminds me a little bit of after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in the mid 2000s, and just that sense of hopelessness that you get. Um, but it kind of has spurred me to think a little bit about, obviously it's a terrible thing to see anybody lose their life. It's terrible to see anybody lose their home or being forced to evacuate or whatever the case may be. It made me think a little bit about how we sometimes will use sports as an escape from reality. And we've seen sports be directly impacted by the fires here. If you were watching the NFL playoffs this weekend, you saw that the LA Chargers in their first round game against the Houston Texans were wearing LAFD hats and shirts and branded apparel, showcasing their support for the Los Angeles Fire Department, and whose resources are stretched incredibly thin right now. And you also have seen, again, recording this Monday afternoon before the Rams and Vikings play, that game has been relocated from LA, SoFi Stadium, to Arizona, in Glendale, where the Cardinals play, and so the game has had to be relocated. The NBA has postponed a couple of Lakers and Clippers games in the wake of this to be able to get out ahead of, people, you know, focusing on more important things. But I do find the other side of this, which is, I follow a decent amount of people on social media who live in the LA area, who are safe, thankfully, and they've kind of liked the fact that sports has been able to become an escape for them from all of this doom and gloom and these hellscape like scenes that we've seen coming out of California. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. about how sports can be that escape, how it can be a refuge. And it makes me think about one of the things I loved about going to movie theaters, especially like when I was single, I would go by myself sometimes, or I would go with like one friend or whatever. And I think the magic of the movie theater is that when you're in there, you're there for one sole purpose to consume a piece of entertainment, right? So you turn your phone off, the lights go dim, you're immersed into this giant screen and the surround sound and all this stuff, and you just unplug for a couple of hours and you are immersed in this sort of in this piece of art that you're watching, right? And I think to a certain extent, maybe not as disconnected, but sports can be that for somebody. And I'll use a personal example. I wrote an article a while ago about the 2020 and 2021 New York Knicks and how they were a shining light for me when I was at a dark point, right? I was in a relationship that was toxic to say the least. I was, with someone who was just incredibly unstable emotionally. And, it when if you've ever been in that type of a situation, you know that that just beats on you and wears you down over time, right? So I was in that situation, and it's COVID time, so you're dealing with losing your job, which I had lost my job. I was working for a company that represented LG Mobile. LG Mobile had exited the smartphone space around that time, and so I was trying to figure a lot of stuff out, right? And as I was trying to do that, the Knicks, who had been just so bad for the previous 7, 8 years, were having a good season with Julius Randle and Tom Thibodeau, and watching them a couple nights a week became this like necessary escape that I needed, right? I didn't while I was watching them play, I didn't have to worry about my job search, or I didn't have to worry about my living situation, or if I was communicating enough with my friends and family, or whatever the case may be, dealing with all the repercussions of COVID. Just a lot going on where for a few hours you could tune into your team and they can be that escape for you. One of the people I follow on Blue Sky, her name is Carrie, and she's based in LA. And she said that, after the Lakers had a couple of postponed games, she's just like, man, I really just would love an escape from everything just to watch some Lakers basketball. And I think that that's the case for a lot of people where in our teams, we form this identity and we associate ourselves with it. And I think a lot of teams, their culture within the team kind of shapes the culture of their fan base. Like the Raiders have a very counterculture type of vibe, right? And I think that their fans often, fall into that counterculture type of thing, right? Especially when they're in LA. Maybe it's changed a little bit now that they've moved to Vegas, but I think when I used to live in Detroit, Detroit Lions fans pride themselves on being gritty, blue collar, hardworking, do whatever it takes to get the job done, being discounted and all that. And you see that team having its success this year, it's a reflection of the city that they play in, and I think that the Knicks and the Celtics, their fans very much value, a grinded out mentality and very much feel that they are one with being able to just persevere through anything. Bad weather doesn't matter. You're just gonna kind of put your feet to the ground and get it right. And a lot of times, Celtics teams and Knicks teams of the past have reflected that. Philadelphia has that same type of feel as well with its basketball and football and baseball teams. So I think that being able to have that piece that you identify with to be able to help you escape in life is a great thing. It's like that friend who's always there for you. And your friend is not perfect. Our teams are not perfect. They don't win every single game, but they're there for you when you need them. And when the times are good, you are also appreciative of that because you're being able to share those moments with other people as well. And that's how kind of relationships and community is formed and all that. And I think a lot of people who don't watch sports, they kind of come at it from an angle of it's just a stupid kids game that you're paying grown people millions of dollars to play, right? And I think that a lot of times is a little bit of a shallow-minded view. So if you're like a person who's been displaced in LA and you're a Rams fan, them having a playoff game against the Vikings tonight is probably a godsend for you because you get to just unplug for a few hours and see what Sean McVay and Matt Stafford can do against a Brian Flores defense. It doesn't solve your problems. It's not intended to solve your problems, but it's an escape, and a lot of people, and even for the players for the Rams, right? Like their practice facility was right there in the burn zone. They play in the area, they live in the area. And so being able to kind of just, lock in on something, you could call it a distraction or whatever, but just have something to focus on, a purpose here, kind of helps you mentally when you're in that sort of a situation. And I just think that that's an underreported and underappreciated aspect of sports is that we always talk about how our favorite teams or favorite athletes will let us down at certain points, right? Whether it's by losing a game or something to do off the field. But quite often, we don't talk about the good that they do. Obviously they do good in the community. That's kind of well documented. But just for us, right? As we're watching them, we're taking all that stuff in and feeling like we're a part of something, and that sense of belonging in this kind of a world where it's more hostile and divisive than it's ever been. Having a sense of community is incredibly important. And when tragedy hits, like I've seen people who've lost family members to disease and death in some sort, and they have relied on their family, of course, but they've also relied on a connection of fans that they've made. They have a common goal. I'm in a group chat with other Knicks fans, and we often share with each other important life experiences. One of our friends in there just announced that he was having his first child, right? And we only knew each other based on this kind of love and appreciation for watching this team. And now we've shared this moment with that person, right? And again, the same goes when you're going through something difficult. You can rely on that community, rely on the escapism of watching that team play, that you can kind of give yourself a break, give yourself some grace to be able to kind of get through what you need to get through. And, I've seen a lot of people trying to build up rallying donations and trying to get the word out and trying to make sure that everybody's safe and all that. That is incredibly mentally taxing, right? It takes a lot out of you to affect change in that positive sort of a way. So to be able to have a a connection to a team where you can watch them lock in for a few hours and then move on and get back into the stuff that really matters, it's just incredibly valuable. And I think it's the same thing like if you go to a music concert, like the Taylor Swift Eras tour was obviously in the news this past year. People who went to that, they were able to kind of leave all of their issues at the door, go in for a few hours and enjoy their favorite artist, do some music, right? It's the same thing with movies. It's the same thing if you go to see a play, whatever the case may be. And, like I think about that when I went and saw Wicked. It was a 3-hour movie. You just escape from everything for 3 hours and just watch this piece of film, right? And that's just incredibly valuable. So I think for me, obviously, our hearts have to go out to anybody who's been affected by this. If you know somebody in that area or, somebody you follow on social medias in that area, obviously, your heart has to go out to them, and you're hoping that everybody stays safe and there isn't any more loss of life in that situation, and that they can stop or contain these fires, so more damage isn't inflicted. But it's going to be a long recovery process. But I think that understanding that, hey, we all are sports fans. We watch our teams. We consume the content. We, are watching every game or whatever. Appreciate the escape that they provide. Appreciate the relief that they give us in our own lives, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like relief and it feels like agitation and annoyance, right? As fans, we're all in this together. And, I know some people have taken this as an opportunity to make it political and talk about, who's running California. And, obviously a state that leans so heavily one way politically is going to get some pushback. I'm sure it's the same thing that happened on the other side of the aisle. If, something happened in like Mississippi or something, somebody would make it political. But at a certain point, it's a human story, right? And we have to be considerate of our fellow humans. So if you or anybody you know is affected by the California fires, yeah, I hope all the best for you. I hope you're staying safe. Uh, and I hope that we'll all get on the other side of this on a good note, and you'll be able to watch Lakers, Clippers, Chargers, Rams, whoever your team is, have success in the future. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you as always for tuning in. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. And until next time, I'm your host, Reza Ron. See you later.